Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet lawyer retreats to his inherited lakeside land for peace, a ruthless HOA declares his private lake community property. What follows is a battle of law, lies, and power, where one man takes on an entire neighborhood to protect what's his. I was never the type to look for a fight. Maybe that's surprising, given that I've spent most of my adult life elbow deep in lawsuits, dissecting corporate malfeasance and land disputes like some people dissect frogs. But this land, my land, was never about winning. It was about peace. 60 acres tucked into the hills of Missouri, wrapped in dense trees and rolling fields, where the only sound most mornings was birdsong echoing off the glassy surface of my lake. My great-grandfather settled this place back when there were still more horses than pickup trucks in these parts. That lake, spring-fed and ringed by oaks older than any living local, was formed naturally, untouched, and pristine. We never called it by any grand name. It was just the lake. My father taught me to fish in it. I taught my daughter to swim in it. And when the corporate noise got too loud, I came home. Built my house on the high ground with a view over the water. One way in, one way out. A gravel road that curved down past the tree line like a private invitation. No one used to bother me out here. That was the unspoken rule. Folks respected property lines in these parts, or at least they used to. I had the deed, the land patents, even the old framed survey from 1938 hanging in my office. The lake was registered, classified, and legally recognized as private, with exclusive riparian rights tied to my parcel alone. No easements, no community access, no shared ownership, period. So when I opened that HOA newsletter one Monday in May, sipping my black coffee and flipping through their usual nonsense about mailbox standards and acceptable pergola paint shades, my jaw nearly dropped into my mug. Effective June 1st, Lake Pinewood shall be designated a community amenity available to all residents of Pinewood Shores. I reread it, then again. The language was slippery, clever, in a way only HOA lawyers and petty tyrants could manage. It claimed the lake had been neglected by its owner, and that under Missouri common use doctrine, the body of water may be lawfully enjoyed by the community as a shared natural resource. Natural resource, my ass. I scrolled further. There were bullet points outlining new community use guidelines. Fishing allowed with HOA permit. No amplified music after 10 p.m. Designated family zones on the North Shore. That North Shore was on my side. All of it was my side. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. A clerical mix-up, maybe. Pinewood Shores had its fingers in a lot of pies lately since the new board took over. The president, Karen Hennings, a woman with a platinum bob, Pilates posture, and the warmth of a suburban zoning ordinance, had already made headlines for trying to ban artificial grass in drought season. But this, claiming ownership over my lake? I called the HOA's general line, went straight to voicemail with some chirpy message about promoting harmony through community compliance. I didn't leave a message. Instead, I logged into their online portal just to confirm what I already feared. There it was. A full-color photo of my lake on the front page of their community update page with the caption, Lake Pinewood, a shared treasure, reclaimed. They'd renamed it. It took me a full hour to cool down enough to think rationally. I pulled the deed from my office safe, reviewed the easement maps, called my clerk friend at the recorder's office just to make sure nothing had slipped past me. Nothing had changed. On paper, on record, and by law, this lake belonged to me. I was the sole legal owner of the parcel encompassing both the shoreline and the water body. What had changed was the perception. HOA perception is a dangerous thing. Once they start talking about community rights and public good, it's only a matter of time before they roll out the bake sales, put up a swing set, and dare you to look like the neighborhood villain when you push back. And sure enough, later that week, an official HOA bulletin was pinned to the local community board at the general store. I saw it when I stopped by for propane. Lake Pinewood Community Day, June 5th. Come celebrate the opening of our beautiful lake to all residents. Fishing, paddle boarding, food trucks. Food trucks. Jesus. What's worse, they'd included a quote, attributed to Karen herself. We cannot allow natural beauty to go to waste behind locked gates. This lake belongs to all of us now. It's time to reclaim what's been denied for too long. Denied. I was out there just last week spraying for invasive cattails and clearing windfall. That lake was more cared for than their entire HOA park, which smelled perpetually of wet mulch and warm urine. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. Maybe some stubborn part of me still thought it could be resolved quietly. A letter here, a meeting there. I figured I'd give them the benefit of the doubt, the way my grandfather might have done. I was wrong, of course, but that truth would reveal itself soon enough, in far louder ways than I'd expected. For now, I just stood there by the corkboard, staring at the words Community Day, listening to the beep of the freezer door behind me as it sealed shut, and wondering how long it would take before someone decided to pitch a tent on my shoreline. The first sign that they weren't bluffing came on a foggy Thursday morning just after sunrise. I was in the middle of my usual walk, checking on the back fence line where the deer like to test their luck, when I noticed something strange through the mist. Down by the gravel road, the only road that touches the lake's edge, stood a brand new metal gate, bright aluminum, HOA gray, and bolted shut with a keypad lock I sure as hell hadn't installed. I stopped dead in my tracks, boots crunching on the frost-bitten grass. For a moment, I just stared at it, thinking maybe it was some prank, or maybe some maintenance crew had mistaken the location. But as I got closer, I saw the real insult. A plastic sign laminated and zip-tied to the gate like a damn trophy. Community Access Point, Lake Pinewood, my lake, their gate. And as if that wasn't enough to spike my blood pressure, there was a bulletin board staked into the dirt nearby with flyers announcing an entire HOA summer series at the lake, children's kayaking lessons, yoga by the water, and a community barbecue day hosted by your HOA leadership team. They were treating my property like a public park. No permit, no consultation, no respect. That afternoon, I drove into town and printed 36 cease and desist letters. One went straight to the HOA office, another to Karen Hennings personally, hand-delivered into her mailbox. The rest went to the sheriff's office, county zoning board, local code enforcement, and the office of the attorney general. I attached maps, deed numbers, registered surveys, and included a clear statement. This land is private property. No access is permitted. Any structures placed without consent are subject to removal. I thought the legal weight would be enough to make them back off. It wasn't. 2 days later, they threw a goddamn birthday party on my shore. I was working in the shed when I heard the laughter, loud, shrieking, chaotic. I stepped outside and looked toward the lake. Down the hill, in the clearing by the south bank, I saw colorful balloons tied to the trees, tables set up, coolers, a bounce house, kids in swimsuits, parents with beers. There had to be 30, maybe 40 people, none of whom had asked permission to be there. I counted at least 7 parked cars pulled halfway into the woods, some of them actually on my grass. I drove the ATV down there without a word. As soon as I got within sight, a woman in a sun hat waved at me like I was staff. "Oh, great. Can you help unload the other cooler? It's in the red SUV." I stared at her like she had 2 heads. "This is private property," I said. "What the hell are you doing here?" She blinked. It's the HOA event?" Karen said this was our new community space. "Karen doesn't own this land," I snapped. "I do. And none of you have the right to be here." That got everyone's attention. The music stopped. Conversations trailed off. Karen herself emerged from the crowd, drink in hand, eyes already narrowed. "Riley," she said, approaching with the kind of smile dentists give before drilling, "you're making a scene. We've already discussed this with the community." "No, you made a unilateral declaration and started trespassing," I replied. "I've filed formal notices. This is illegal." "We held a vote," she said coolly. 72 residents in favor of declaring the lake a shared amenity. I almost laughed. "You don't get to vote to take someone else's property, Karen. That's not democracy. That's looting with paperwork." She didn't like that. The smile faltered. "We acted in the interest of the neighborhood," she said, trying to maintain her posture. "This lake was unused, neglected. We brought it back to life." "Neglected?" I snapped. "I had to replant native grass twice last season because your idiots kept trampling it. And if you don't remove that illegal gate and these damn structures by the end of the week, I'll have them dismantled myself." Karen's expression curdled. "You touch any of this, and you'll be violating community use rights under easement by prescription." There it was. The term she'd no doubt copied and pasted from some law blog she read between yoga classes. There is no easement, no prescriptive use. This is fenced, registered, and has been in exclusive use by my family for over 90 years. I suggest you consult someone who actually passed the bar exam. I turned the ATV around and left, but not before taking pictures. Dozens of them. Faces, plates, structures, all logged, time-stamped, and ready for court. The next morning, they doubled down. New signs went up on the gate, this time warning me not to obstruct public access. One neighbor even left a typed note in my mailbox suggesting that it might be time to think about what's best for the greater good. The greater good. I installed a motion camera on the road, another down by the shore. I wasn't just dealing with entitled neighbors anymore. This was starting to look and smell like an organized land grab under the flimsy pretense of community spirit. They were escalating, but they had no idea that I had more than property lines and common sense on my side. I had the law. And it was time to start treating this like what it was, a hostile invasion papered over with barbecue invitations and fake ballots. The envelope showed up on a Tuesday, thick and overconfident, the kind of mail that wants to be taken seriously. HOA letterhead, glossy paper, my name printed in bold like they were doing me a favor by spelling it correctly. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it was going to be, and I wanted the satisfaction of being right. Inside was the so-called official protocol of the community vote. 72 signatures. 72 residents, according to Karen, had unanimously agreed that my lake was now a shared asset. The language was theatrical, almost ceremonial, dripping with phrases like collective benefit and restorative access. It read less like a legal document and more like a manifesto written by someone who had just discovered power and liked the way it felt. I went through the signatures slowly, line by line. Name, address, signature. At first glance, it looked convincing. At second glance, it fell apart like wet cardboard. One name belonged to a man who had died 3 years earlier. I knew because I'd helped his widow with probate. Another signature matched a resident who had sold their house the previous fall and moved to Arizona. 2 signatures were identical, same slant, same pressure, same flourish at the end, like they'd been copied by the same hand. Karen's hand, if I had to bet. That's when the irritation burned off and something colder settled in. I pulled county records, property transfer logs, HOA membership rolls, cross-referenced everything. By nightfall, I had a neat little spreadsheet that told a very ugly story. Nearly a third of the voters were either ineligible, non-existent, or deceased. One signature belonged to a woman who had never been a member of Pinewood Shores at all. She lived 2 counties over. This wasn't incompetence. This was fabrication. The next morning, I requested a formal audit of HOA authority under Missouri statute, citing suspected forgery and ultra-vires actions. I filed it through the county clerk, CEC'd the state registrar, and attached copies of the signatures with my annotations. I didn't accuse anyone by name. I didn't have to. The documents spoke clearly enough on their own. By Friday, I had confirmation that the audit request was accepted. That should have slowed them down. Instead, they accelerated. Karen sent out another bulletin, this one more aggressive, announcing a decisive resident assembly to permanently codify the lake as a public community resource. The date was set for the following week. The location, the HOA meeting hall. The agenda included one item only, final confirmation of community water rights. What she didn't include was the fact that I had already filed for a temporary restraining order. The judge granted it within 48 hours. The language was unambiguous. The HOA was prohibited from holding any meetings, votes, or assemblies related to the lake, its access, or its legal status until the matter was resolved. Violation would constitute contempt of court. I sent Karen a copy by certified mail. I sent another to the HOA's registered agent. I sent one to the sheriff's office for good measure, and then I waited. She ignored it. The day after the order was issued, Karen posted on the HOA website that the assembly would proceed as planned and that external interference would not derail the democratic will of the residents. She framed it like a moral stand, the way people do when they know they're wrong but want applause anyway. That night, an email landed in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. No name, no signature, just an attachment. It was internal HOA correspondence. Emails between Karen and 2 board members discussing how to push the vote through before Riley escalates, how to control the narrative, and how enforcement would be easier once the lake is officially ours. One line stuck out more than the rest. If he challenges it, we'll say the vote already happened. I sat back in my chair and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was spectacularly stupid. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They weren't just lying. They were actively conspiring to override a court order and falsify governance records. That kind of arrogance doesn't just lose civil cases, it invites criminal ones. I printed everything, multiple copies. Stored digital backups in 3 separate locations. I didn't contact Karen. I didn't warn her again. At that point, warnings would have been a courtesy she no longer deserved. If she wanted to hold her decisive assembly, she was welcome to try. She just wouldn't be doing it unopposed. By the time the sun rose on the day of the assembly, I had everything in place. The restraining order sat folded in my inside jacket pocket, along with notarized copies of the land deed, the property survey, and the state-verified shoreline registry. My briefcase held high-resolution prints of the forged signatures, the fake vote logs, and the internal HOA emails, generously provided by someone who still hadn't identified themselves, but whom I was increasingly inclined to thank with a bottle of good whiskey. That morning, I stopped by the county courthouse and filed for an emergency injunction. The clerk, a woman named Jan, who knew my family from back when my father used to argue water rights cases in this same building, didn't even blink. HOA trouble, she asked. I just nodded. They're getting bold lately, she muttered, stamping the papers with more force than strictly necessary. At noon, I submitted a formal complaint to the Missouri Real Estate Commission citing the HOA for misrepresentation of land access in community advertising. If Karen wanted to play this like a public PR stunt, I'd be damned if I let her do it without scrutiny from the people who actually understood property law. By early afternoon, I'd received notice from the county assessor's office that an enforcement inspection of the unauthorized pier and access structures had been approved. I had names, I had signatures, I had statutes. I was ready. And then I suited up. Not figuratively. I put on the same charcoal suit I wore the day I closed on the estate, back when the land transferred from my father's trust to me. It was tailored, a little stiff in the shoulders now, but it carried the kind of weight that didn't come from thread count. The assembly was scheduled for 6 p.m. in the HOA hall, a modest beige building that tried very hard to look like a courthouse, but ended up resembling a community center that had given up halfway through puberty. I arrived 10 minutes early, not as a resident, not as a neighbor, but as legal representation for the private property owner currently under threat by an unlawful governance body. Karen was already there, of course. She stood at the front of the room in a crimson blazer that practically screamed, "I am important," addressing a crowd of maybe 40 people. Most were seated in folding chairs, sipping lukewarm coffee and flipping through the agenda packet like it mattered. The audacity was almost impressive. I didn't say a word. Just walked up to the board table and placed a stack of documents in front of the secretary, a thin man with the twitchy hands of someone deeply uncomfortable with conflict. "You'll want to stop taking minutes," I said quietly. "What's about to happen is going to invalidate anything recorded tonight." Karen's voice faltered mid-sentence. She spotted me. Her lips thinned. "Riley," she said, with the performative warmth of someone greeting a dog they suspect might bite. "We didn't expect you to join us." "I'm not joining you," I said. "I'm ending this." That got murmurs from the crowd. A few turned in their seats. One woman near the back raised her phone to start recording. "Fine by me." I took the floor without asking. "My name is Riley Davenport. I am the sole legal owner of the parcel containing what you call Lake Pinewood. I am also here under authority granted by the court to enforce a temporary restraining order issued against this organization." Karen opened her mouth. I didn't let her speak. "This assembly is a violation of that order. Any action taken here tonight is void, and anyone participating may be held liable for contempt. I have certified documents, property records, and copies of your own fraudulent correspondence admitting that you knew this meeting was unlawful and chose to proceed anyway." The room went quiet, save for the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights and the rustling of paper as people began to look around in confusion. I held up the internal email, highlighted and labeled. This was sent from Karen Hennings's personal account to 2 HOA board members, explicitly stating your intent to push the vote through and to ignore legal obstacles. I've submitted this and supporting evidence to the sheriff's office and the office of the attorney general. Karen finally found her voice. "You don't have the right to hijack this meeting." "I'm not hijacking anything," I said. "This isn't a meeting. Not anymore. It's an illegal gathering conducted under false authority. Under your own bylaws, Section 3, Subsection 1.2, the board loses administrative legitimacy when engaging in actions that endanger community trust or expose the HOA to legal liability." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the printed statute. "I hereby invoke that clause and file for immediate board suspension under your own governance rules. Effective now." The room erupted, people shouting, Karen trying to regain control. Someone stood and demanded to know if this meant the lake wasn't theirs after all. The board secretary dropped his pen and backed away from the table like it was radioactive, and then the police arrived. 2 officers responding to the enforcement complaint I'd filed earlier that day walked into the chaos like referees at a bar fight. One of them held a warrant for document seizure related to suspected forgery and misuse of HOA funds. I stepped aside. Let them do their job. Karen was still sputtering about community rights when they escorted her to the hallway for questioning. The crowd thinned fast after that. Some muttered apologies. Others slipped out the side door without looking at me. One man, older, worn-looking, clapped me on the shoulder as he left. "Damn glad someone finally stood up to her," he said. I didn't respond. I was too busy watching the board secretary hand over the vote logs with shaking fingers. The moment the police stepped out with the records, I knew we'd crossed a line. This wasn't about boundaries anymore. It wasn't even about property. This was about power and the people who thought they could take it with a clipboard and a smile. They thought it was over when the cops walked out of that meeting hall. That maybe it was all just a misunderstanding, a bit of overzealous neighborhood organizing that got a little too ambitious. Karen probably imagined that a few tense phone calls, maybe a stern letter from the board's attorney, assuming they even had one, would make it all go away. They were wrong. I'd spent my career studying how power operates when it thinks no one's watching. I'd seen corporate executives rig audits, non-profits fudge grant numbers. Even a church once tried to hide embezzlement behind a children's literacy program. But the HOA? They were amateurs, and worse, arrogant ones. They thought the rules didn't apply to them because they'd created their own. The following week was a flurry of paperwork. I filed an official petition for administrative dissolution of Pinewood Shores HOA under Missouri statute, citing egregious governance violations and unlawful claims over private property. That got the attention of the county administrative court fast. Meanwhile, I'd hired a private forensics consultant to examine the original community vote logs. His preliminary report came back in 3 days. Out of 72 signatures, 23 were outright forgeries. 9 were traced names of deceased residents. 4 were duplicates using the same handwriting. 1 was signed by someone who had sold their house 2 years ago and moved to Florida. It was textbook fraud, and it wasn't going to be handled with a slap on the wrist. Karen went silent for a few days. No statements, no newsletters, no defiant press releases. The HOA website suddenly went under maintenance, and the phone line redirected to voicemail. But then, like a roach scurrying back into the kitchen when the lights go out, she reappeared. First, I noticed someone had torn down my private property, no trespassing sign at the entrance to the lake road. I replaced it. 2 days later, it was gone again, this time snapped in half and tossed into the brush. Then, a neighbor, nice woman, mid-50s, who used to wave every morning, suddenly began recording me from her porch as I walked my land, as if I were the criminal. Someone left a flyer in my mailbox with a Bible quote on it about those who hoard blessings for themselves. Real subtle, but the real kicker. Karen scheduled another community meeting, this time branding it as a private invitation-only event hosted under a different name, the Pinewood Commons Initiative. No HOA logo, no official title, just a new Facebook group and a clumsily designed flyer distributed by email. I called the county prosecutor's office and handed over the forensics report. 2 days later, I was informed they had opened a criminal investigation into document falsification and potential election fraud within the HOA. Not civil, criminal, but I wasn't done. I dug deeper into HOA finances, public records they were legally required to disclose. I found inconsistent filings, beautification budgets with thousands in expenses, but no documentation, payments issued to companies that didn't seem to exist. One contractor was listed as KH Community Enhancement, registered under Karen Henning's maiden name. Oh, Karen. I submitted everything to the Attorney General's office and filed a whistleblower affidavit under Missouri's Community Governance Integrity Act. The next morning, 2 plainclothes investigators showed up at the HOA office with subpoenas. I wasn't there when they took her computer, but I saw her face later that day when she drove past my house. Slow, deliberate, eyes fixed on me through the windshield like a rattlesnake watching from the grass. I raised my coffee mug and smiled. She didn't wave back. That same afternoon, I received an anonymous manila envelope. No return address. Inside, printed screenshots of Karen's group chats with board members. They joked about bullying Riley into giving up the lake and talked about making up fines to bury me in paperwork. One message read, "Worst case, we pay a settlement and move on." He's one guy. We're a whole community. That's when it became clear. They still didn't understand. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. It wasn't about boundaries or barbecues or bylaws. This was about accountability. And I wasn't going anywhere. The knock on Karen's door came at precisely 7:43 in the morning. I wasn't there to witness it, but I heard about it from 3 different sources by noon. Plainclothes officers, warrant in hand. They walked out 20 minutes later with 2 laptops, a desktop tower, and a banker's box full of HOA records she apparently thought were safe in her hallway closet. By mid-afternoon, the county sheriff's office had issued a formal press release. Karen Hennings, president of Pinewood Shores HOA, under investigation for fraudulent governance practices, misuse of community funds, and document forgery. I read it while drinking coffee on my back porch, overlooking the lake she'd once tried to call her own. It only took another 48 hours for the entire thing to start collapsing. The board held an emergency session. Well, tried to. Their VP, a nervous man named Leonard who once tried to fine me for parking my trailer too close to a view corridor, sent out an email asking residents to remain calm during this difficult time. It read like someone trying to put a fire out by fanning it with gasoline. Residents weren't calm. They were pissed. Turns out Karen hadn't just gone rogue on the lake. People started pulling their HOA dues records, combing through old meeting notes, comparing vote outcomes with real attendance logs. Within 2 days, a dozen homeowners had filed complaints of financial misconduct, claiming Karen had allocated funds for projects that were never completed or never existed. The garden upgrade near the east entrance? No permits, no invoices, no evidence. The security camera installations listed in last year's budget? Non-existent. One guy pulled out the supposed contractor's info and found a disconnected number and a P.O. box in Kansas City that no longer belonged to the business. They'd been lied to, finessed, bled dry under the guise of community development. And now that the veil had lifted, no one was afraid to say it. A group of residents formed a coalition and hired their own attorney. I offered mine the moment I heard. They filed a joint petition to dissolve the HOA entirely, citing gross violations of fiduciary duty, procedural manipulation, and irreparable breakdown of trust. I added my own affidavit, not about the lake this time, about the broader abuse of power, the fraud, the intimidation tactics, and the quiet little war they'd tried to start under the cover of suburban civility. The court responded within the week. Pinewood Shores Homeowners Association was suspended pending full audit and potential permanent dissolution. Karen tried to file a motion to delay. She claimed the investigation was politically motivated, said she was being targeted by a disgruntled landowner with a vendetta. The judge dismissed it without a hearing. A few days later, she was formally charged. 3 felony counts: falsifying official documents, fraudulent financial reporting, and obstruction of a lawful court order. There were also 2 misdemeanor charges, trespassing and malicious mischief, tacked on for good measure. The mugshot made the local paper. Her red blazer from the Community Lake Day was still visible under the jail-issued windbreaker. Meanwhile, HOA members began jumping ship. The secretary resigned. The treasurer vanished, his mailbox overflowing with unopened HOA mail. 2 board members issued public apologies on Nextdoor, claiming they had no idea things had gone so far. I believed one of them, the other. He was at the lake that day, holding a pair of barbecue tongs and laughing like he'd won something. They weren't laughing anymore. I held off on public statements. Let the process speak for itself. Let the headlines do the talking. Let Karen sit in court and explain how an unused body of water justified identity fraud and financial theft. The final nail came from the state's Department of Consumer Protection. An emergency review of HOA filings revealed that Karen had been signing financial authorizations using a revoked notary license, one that had been pulled 5 years earlier for ethics violations in a property dispute. Classic. The Attorney General's office filed for permanent dissolution. It was done. Just like that, the great empire of laminated newsletters, passive-aggressive bylaws, and fake lakeside communism crumbled like wet drywall. And Karen? She was awaiting trial, her bail set at $75,000, her career as a community leader effectively over. They say power reveals character. Karen's character was revealed through subpoenas, forged signatures, and a peer that never should have existed. I stood at the edge of my lake that evening, the sun burning low behind the hills, and watched as a county code enforcement crew arrived to begin dismantling the pier. No ceremony, no announcement, just crowbars and determination. I didn't help. I didn't need to. The pier came down in under an hour. No protest, no last-minute dramatic appeals. Just the sound of splintering wood and the rhythmic hissing of cordless saws slicing through what was once billed as the symbol of shared community joy. A couple of raccoons watched from the tree line like bored spectators at a demolition derby. I didn't record it. I didn't need a souvenir. The real satisfaction came in the silence afterward, that thick, undeniable hush when something wrong is finally undone. Over the next week, the cleanup continued. The signs were the first to go. Community lake access, resident fishing zone, and my personal favorite, HOA shoreline activity area, rules enforced. All of them yanked out of the soil, tossed into a flatbed, and driven off to wherever. Bureaucratic fantasies go to die. Then the gate. They had welded that thing into the earth like they were building a Cold War bunker. But in the end, a few well-placed cuts and a tow chain did the trick. I watched from the hill above, hands in my pockets, as it crumpled sideways like a drunk collapsing into a bar stool. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all their noise about access, they were the ones locked out now. But the real work? That began once the physical debris was gone. My inbox exploded with messages, some angry, some apologetic. One woman offered to bake me a pie as a gesture of neighborly reconciliation, which I politely declined. Another man left a voicemail that started with, "I didn't know what she was really doing," and ended with a pathetic request to keep using the lake just on weekends. No, I wasn't bitter, but I wasn't stupid either. I met with a local contractor and scheduled the installation of a new perimeter fence, taller, reinforced, with a sensor gate and surveillance system linked to my phone. The gravel road, closed off entirely except for a private keypad and vehicle recognition. I even contacted the county GIS office and had the digital maps updated to reflect private, no public right-of-way, just in case another Karen ever decided to get creative. One afternoon, while the crew was digging post holes, I stood by the truck reviewing final invoices and caught sight of a familiar red SUV parked at the edge of the access road. Engine idling, driver visible but unmoving. Karen. Out on bail, apparently. Sitting there like a phantom from a cautionary tale. She didn't get out, just stared at the lake for a solid 10 minutes before turning the wheel and vanishing down the hill. I never saw her again after that. Not in court. Not in town. Word was she took a plea deal that included a gag order, a hefty restitution payment, and 5 years of probation. Good enough. As for the HOA, it was officially terminated 2 weeks later. The judge signed the dissolution order without even holding a hearing. Too much evidence, too many violations, and not enough board left to make an argument. Their remaining assets, mostly reserve funds, were frozen pending redistribution, with a portion designated for repayment to homeowners who had been overcharged or misled. A few of the neighbors wanted to organize a new group, a loose collective with voluntary involvement and transparent management. I wished them luck and declined to participate. I wasn't interested in rules disguised as favors anymore. With the lake secure, I finally allowed myself to breathe again. There was something cleansing about it all, walking the shoreline without wondering who was creeping behind a bush or setting up a beach towel like they owned the damn place. I trimmed the overgrowth, repaired the old dock I'd built with my daughter, and placed a new plaque at the head of the trail. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. No emojis, no friendly font, just the truth. One evening, as the sun dropped below the trees and the lake lit up like burnished gold, I poured myself a drink, sat at the end of the dock, and let my feet dangle in the water. No shouting kids, no music, no board meetings or votes or smiling liars handing out flyers, just peace. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like the land had exhaled. Like it had been holding its breath through every trespass, every stolen inch of shoreline, every entitled grin. Not anymore. I didn't expect the story to spread beyond our county. I figured it would live and die as a local cautionary tale, something whispered at HOA meetings elsewhere. Don't pull a Karen. But a month after the dissolution, I got a call from a reporter at a regional paper, then a second from a legal podcast, and then a third from a lawyer in St. Louis who wanted to quote my filings in a class action case against another HOA trying to reinterpret property boundaries. Apparently, I'd become a symbol. Not something I was aiming for, but I wasn't exactly running from it either. The article ran in the Missouri Legal Journal, "When HOAs Go Too Far, One Man's Fight to Reclaim His Shoreline and His Rights." They called it a landmark case in grassroots property defense. Bit dramatic, but the sentiment wasn't wrong. The best part, it wasn't just about me anymore. Turns out my case triggered a statewide review of how HOAs operate. The Attorney General's office began auditing associations across Missouri for voting irregularities, financial opacity, and improper enforcement. Several were fined. A few were dissolved. I got thank you emails from people I'd never met, some from counties I've never even driven through. One guy in Jefferson County wrote, "We used to think the HOA was untouchable. Thanks for showing us they bleed." I printed that one out and pinned it in the shed. But here's the part that mattered most to me. The community changed. Not overnight, but something shifted. People started talking to each other again, not through forms or rule books, but over fences, on porches, face to face. Some neighbors came up just to say they were sorry for not asking questions sooner. A few offered to help with repairs on the road after the heavy rains in August. And one man, a quiet guy named Dave, who used to keep his head down, dropped off a small carved wooden sign that read, "Respect the boundary." It hangs beside my gate now. I didn't forget what happened. I didn't forgive most of it either. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I'd won. Not just legally, but on a level I hadn't even realized I was fighting for. Ownership, not just of the land, but of peace. That's when I decided to write the article. Not a blog post. Not a social media rant. A real piece published in the Midwest Law Observer under my own name, with every detail laid bare. When the HOA Becomes the Invader, a property owner's guide to surviving organized overreach. I outlined everything from the fake vote to the restraining order, from the fabricated pier to the court dissolution. I laid out what I learned, what I would do differently, and how people can fight back without losing their minds or their land. It wasn't emotional, it was surgical, cold, but beneath the words was fire, and judging by the response, people felt it. I even got a request to speak at a property rights conference, politely declined. I'd had enough microphones for one lifetime. The lake? Still mine, still private, and still undisturbed. I walk it every morning now. The air's different somehow. Not just cleaner, but quieter. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. It's a strange feeling, standing on a dock, knowing no one's coming to steal it, vote it away, or rename it after a bake sale. One morning, I found a pair of kids standing at the edge of the gate, peering through the fence. Locals, maybe 8 or 9. They asked if the stories were true, about the fight, about the woman who tried to take the lake. I told them the truth. She didn't take it, I said, because I didn't let her. They asked if the lake was magic. I told them no, but I didn't blame them for thinking so.